G'day, friends and fans. Welcome to Writing Corner. Write what you know. I'd like to clarify something. I did a video earlier on Stephen King and why you shouldn't listen, or why I don't listen to, or why you shouldn't either listen to Stephen King. Now, at the time, I said you can. I also did a video about, know your audience. And that's another write what you know video. But there seems to be a lot of people out there who don't actually understand the term write what you know. And it's basically not derogatory. It's not saying you can't write any subject. I'm just saying when it comes to writing about something, whether it be Black culture, the Roman Empire, fictional or somewhat established fictional but fantasy races, or even allegedly sci-fi aliens, and again, if you're writing, say, MCU or fan fiction from Harry Potter, you have to know the setting, you have to know the characters, you have to know the lore. A lot of people are not writing what they know. They're making stuff up. That they're answering questions. See, the height of ignorance is to answer a question differently than the existing answer, right? What's Superman's real name? People have changed that over the years. What about Captain America or the Hulk? They've changed that. They've changed the Banner story so many times. Nobody really knows the original, way back in the original Hulk. It's the same with a lot of these fantasy fictional universes, like the Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth. The people who've taken over are not writing what they know. They are trying to create, they're not filling gaps either. They're trying to alter the existing. And a lot of writers actually do this to themselves. Now, I'm not saying to be an expert on Asimov and iRobot, but there is a sort of argument to be made that while on the surface it appears, the robotic corporation is despotic and anti-democratic and basically downright to some extent evil, but of course then they have the Cirrus Corporation, which seems to be either a mirror of the company, a rival, a branch that went rogue. There seems to be some sort of discrepancy there, but nobody questions nobody revolts. It's the world of iRobot is a cyberpunk dystopia before it's a dystopia. A corporate dystopia that seems to be presented in a very utopic presentation. Now, I don't know if this was intentional, but again, Asimov wrote what he knew, what they knew about robotics and what they had guessed about android brains, positronic brains. Star Trek used the iRobot model of androids, the positronic brain. The use of positrons to replace neurons. To replace neuron activity. To the transmission of information between processors at high speed, because the theory was that a positron could be have massive amount of information deposited onto it and transmitted between various processors, and these processors would be tiny and linked like neurons, and they'd interact and basically mimic the human brain. Pathways would develop, etc., and eventually, from the inputs of the different sensors, a self-aware machine would come to, and that self-assured machine could copy itself ad infinitum onto other machines. And that's why he actually predicted wireless linking and other things, or allegedly. I don't claim to be an expert, but before Star Trek, Asimov put together a much better universe than or of science fiction and science fiction technologies that still persist today. And a lot of people use that science fiction basis. It's now called retro future, where you have that 1950s style future, but with 1950s but ray guns. That all comes from Asimov. But one of the things an author can do in world building, in city building, faction building, character building, is to have an established lore, whether it's in Lord of the Rings, you have the 28 notebooks of Tolkien, or allegedly 28 notebooks. You have the notebooks of Dune. You have the lore of Dune, the lore of iRobot. There are lore books out there now. You have you have Wikipedia for Star Trek. There's no excuse why Game of Thrones went off the rails. They had a lore book, LORE, not LAW. So when it comes to writing what you know, if you don't know the history of Gambia and you want to write about Gambia, there's enough information out there to tell you not just about Gambia, but not just the nation, its history, its people, its language, its culture, but its mythology. So there should be no restriction on what you write about. I'm just saying that before you write about Gambia, Middle Earth, Star Trek, Star Wars, Harry Potter, or your own, should know the lore, LORE. And if you're creating your own universe, you have to create your own lore, LORE. Now, lore is very difficult because it can be as simple as a 3-page outline. I mean, a single book isn't going to have a lot of lore in it. Whereas Star Trek is I believe several hundred books. Star Wars, there are over 500 comic books and over 500 individual pieces of media, not including the movies. You have so many handbooks and all that. So there's no excuse for any writer of Star Wars material to get things wrong. So why do they? Well, they don't really. The problem with universes like Star Wars is they start with very little and they build as they go. So, and Lucas was adamant that midichlorians had to be included. He was adamant there had to be a scientific explanation for everything. For the powers of the Force had to have a scientific basis. And his answer was midichlorians. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it upset the man babies who don't read the lore, who don't read the extended material. They consume product. They sit down to a movie, and Star Wars is lightsaber battles and AT-STs and X-Wings. And every story sits. Vader, Luke, X-Wings, TIE fighters, you name it. Almost every Star Wars book contains hundreds of years of adventures by the same group of people. But that's what babies, they cannot handle change. They change of environment. Whereas some progressive fictions like iRobot were able to progress very smoothly. Foundation series very smoothly advance their lore with each iteration, almost if the lore was pre-written. And I think that's the big difference. Same with Star Trek. A lot of people don't know this, but the Star Trek lore was well worked out between for a 5 season. Actually, I believe it was extended, but originally they had a 5 season plan, and they actually had the lore for different worlds, how they became members of the Federation, the history of the Federation, how the various races settled their differences. That there weren't too many interstellar. See, there weren't too many wars, and basically the Romulan Empire, Klingons, they all had their they had a quadrant, a whole mapped out. And so they were able to expand on that slowly, and that was generally accepted. The Kardashians, the shapeshifters, Q, and many other beings were easily slotted in because they were not glorious. They weren't like a shelf where you could see the gaps. It was like, oh yes, we peeled back a layer and there's this. Oh yes, of course. Every new star system is introducing a new lore, a new history. People were more open, accepting. The Star Trek universe was much broader and deeper than the Star Wars universe. But again, it's because the people weren't writing what they know. They were introducing new material without reference to the old material because there was no. So they just basically said, oh, the Force is female now. Just changed it. Oh, the Force is metachlorians. They just changed it. They just changed it. They didn't say. They didn't have a moment or an introduction. So when you're writing what you know, of course, it's all about presentation. So let's take metachlorians. You have the Jedi. You have them talking about the Force. You would have the novice ask, but what, you master, you told me the Force is in everything. It is, this all-encompassing power. I can feel it, but what is this? Let's just say they're training, and he says your power has increased, and he says, well, I don't feel it. And he says, well, and and he would bring out the scanner, and he says, what's this? And he says, the Force concentrates in your blood around metachlorians. Force sensitive users, or the Force sensitive, have a higher concentration of metachlorians than non-Force users. Metachlorians are everywhere, and just don't make it sound like it's a virus, a bug, or bacteria. That it's a concentration of the Force that we can measure through its, when it's, you have to think about it for a while and build it up. That metachlorians is a concentration of the Force in the blood of Force users. That it's still like everywhere. It's not. It doesn't have a gender. It doesn't have an agenda. Like there's the light side, dark side, but that's it. It doesn't have a gender. It doesn't have a gray zone. It doesn't have this political. Oh yes, you're allowed to kill because you're a freedom fighter. Yeah, see, the Force doesn't work like that. It is very primal. And it has to be present the metachlorians and scanning metachlorians to give a Force ratings would be on that primal level, that it concentrates the force, changes something in your blood, and these concentrations of energy we can scan for are known as metachlorians. And that would be a more logical representation than saying, yeah, it's an STD. Somebody with metachlorians popped your mum and she caught it and it concentrated in you, you know. And see, you've taken what you know about the force and expanded on it rather than redefining it and then redefining it later because the audience couldn't accept that it's an STD because it doesn't make sense in the original presentation. When expanding, the main rule of expanding lore, legends, mythology is write what you know. I'll take another example before I go. The elves. To most people, the elves is the English name for a group of people, probably anywhere from found in Nordic, Anglo-Saxon, and other Germanic peoples' legends predominantly, but it's also found in Celtic, Asian, Brazilian, Central and North African, Middle Eastern, Brazilian, and other. You have the green people in Brazil. You have the tree people. I think it's Guatemalan. You have many different interpretations and legends. And the flower elves comes from the Japanese, but it's also found in Korean and Chinese legends. And I have taken some of the legends, what I know, and built on them. And doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean, right, that your idea of elves or Tolkien's idea of elves is wrong. It's just different. I wrote what I know. You wrote what you know. Tolkien wrote what he knew. But the point is, they didn't take something. They didn't take the idea of the elf and say, "No, bro, I'm gonna make him little. I'm gonna make him little short, with funny bat ears, subservient, like elves and the shoemaker." But that was actually a poor translation of a earlier story. But see, the Germanic word, I think, in the original text for elf and the shoemaker, what's the name? I'm trying to think. I just had a moment. Brownie didn't translate well into English. They couldn't find an English translation. So the Germanic legend changed it to elf. The Arfant, I think it was, is from the brownie, the Brana, comes actually not just found in German, but Bruna in the Polish and Czech. Now, these were not elves. These were short, considered in the family of sprites, which is which does fall under the Fae, the fairy tale races, but but they're more in tune with goblin than they are with elves, but see, again, if you don't know and you just pick a name and you say, "Oh yes, children recognize the story of the shoemaker and the elves," and yes, we'll have these little subservient slaves to the humans, you know, appeal to the egocentric who want a subservient class to serve them. That's what egocentric people do. They always want to feel superior, so they need a inferior race. But it's generally believed the brownie or the legends of came from the mistreatment of smaller and often disfigured humans of the Middle Ages, and was probably a derogatory term for the swarthy dwarves of the Proto-European peoples, and that's just don't forget the Germanic peoples actually invaded. They didn't originate Northern Europe; they originated in the Caucasus, and they overtook the Proto-Europeans, as they're called, the Celts and the others, and the elves were. And it's believed generally that there were people prior to the current Europeans, and they called them Proto-Europeans. But generally believed that there were a lot of stuff made up over the years too. Various writers, and again, I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying for general audience acceptance, you have to write what you know. And in order to write what you know, you have to know it. You have to research it. And you just can't say, oh, yes, that's an elf. I'm going to make stuff up about elves and turn them into pink and purple people with square jaws, pointed noses, and no hair, and blue eyes, green hair, or blonde hair, blue, or they're all blonde hair, blue eyes, which actually, if you look at the painting of the elves, a lot of them are gingers actually, and though there were actually variations of elves. Some were big, some were small, but there's generally that they were a long living race. And generally, it's accepted around the 14th century, they disappeared forever. And again, if you're into law, you wouldn't change that. You would write what you know and write what exists. But write what exists is too specific, because when it comes to elves, or would you write Tolkien or Nordic, Japanese, Brazilian, whatever? And same with robots. Do you go with the Asimov model, which most people do? But there are others, and more scientific and more generally accepted, that actually androids don't have androids wouldn't have a internal brain, but rather a complex set of brains or electronic modules in their body, and their heads would be processing would be sensory input to the processors, and then the arms and legs would be wouldn't be on a humanoid frame, but more of a industrial mechanical frame. And you actually see this, and you would call it the Terminator model. The electronics and power supply in the chest, the head with the central processor, and the which would take input from the eyes and other sensors throughout the body, and it would have a very machine-like structure. Able to outperform a human. Whereas, or you could mix it up, but again, when it comes to writing robots, there's enough about robots and robotics more than anything else. Same with war machines. there are actually fantastical stories prior to World War One about tanks that go all the way back to the ancient Indian times about the armored turtle, men riding inside an armored turtle, firing fiery spears, and that the spears would explode. You had rocket bikes in ancient Mayan legends. You had flying machines in many ancient legends. You have dragons in many ancient legends. In fact, there are so many variants of dragons that the Dungeons and Dragons make dragons sound like there's this one big group, and then there's these four. You've got the chromatic and the metallic, and then you've got a couple of sub variants. But actually, in the world of legends, dragons, they're just thousands of variations, and some of them you get the Chinese luck dragon is totally different from the Chinese rain dragon or the Japanese kaiju. The Brazilian feathered, is it Brazilian or Central American feathered dragon? So again, research would reveal more of this, and you'd get more, and you actually see, wow, like more dragons than dinosaurs. There's quite a wonderful world of dragons just to explore and make up if you so wish. But the general term of dragon still holds a lizard or lizard-like being. But there are others. There's the story, the Hydra from Greek. But you also have the three-headed Gregorian dragon of Russia. You have the two-headed dragon of Eastern Europe. You have the supermassive Western dragons, and you have the I suppose parrot-like feathered dragons, although they came in different sizes as well. So when it comes to writing what you know, a little research, and you'll find, and you just expand on it. Create your own. I'm not saying don't create your own. I'm just saying there's a basis, and you build off it, and that flow of building. So if you want to create alien race and variations and branches, you can go, well, there used to be this. There used to be this planet Vulcan, the light and the dark. The light side, logic, and the dark side, emotion. And the emotional, the Civil War, the logical people won because the emotional people, rather than face the military defeat, fled. And they created the Romulan Empire. But when the Vulcans tried to unify them, they found the Vulcans had become this. Sorry, the Vulcans found that the Romulans had become this vast interstellar empire. So the Vulcans went around recruiting spacefaring races into a federation to oppose their dark brethren, and they never made the original difference between the Vulcans and was pretty much like the light elves and the dark elves. The Vulcans were originally projected to be tall, blonde hair, blue eyed, light skin, and the swarthy, dark haired, brown eyed, slightly brown skin Romulans. But the problem is they settled on wanting McCoy, Spock, and Jim Kirk to be the main characters. But when they wanted to cast Shatner, they'd seen him off Leonard Nimoy in what's it called? Was it Outer Limits or Mission Impossible? One of the two. I'd seen them off together several times since, and they couldn't separate them, so they just slightly changed the Vulcans a little bit. But again, it didn't matter because people didn't know the law. So once they'd set the law in motion, they didn't change it and didn't say, "Oh, we're going to make all." It wasn't until later Bremen said, "Hey, there's black Vulcans." And they said, "What?" I said, "Well, we're just expanding on the Vulcans. We're not saying they're all black and they're all white. We're just saying that there was a group of Vulcans from the tropical region who were obviously dark skinned." That expanded the law because it made sense that, yes, there would be a group of Vulcans. Because if you look, you go, yeah, all right, that makes sense. They're not replacing the Vulcan race entirely. They're saying that there's another branch. And, well, why didn't this branch come up in the past? Because they were low key. They were they were neither pure logic or they were logical. They were part of the logical branch, and that they weren't large, they weren't outspoken, they weren't predominant in Vulcan society. And again, that makes sense. So when it comes to what it makes more sense in saying write what exists, because what you take the knowledge, a set of facts, and lay out a logical sequence, whether or not a lot of things like metachlorians, the way George Lucas presented, was rather emotional. He was emotionally attached to the idea. He didn't and thus he didn't make a logical case for it. He didn't think it out. And again, what also has to be what the audience knows. So if you present force, magic, psychics, I forget, there's probably sorcerers, wizards, whatever, warlocks, witches, as having certain powers. You can expand them, but you can't redefine them. Though you could say, oh yeah, this group of warlocks, they could pluck out their eye and see around corners, or this group of witches, all their magical curses involve brewing, like in Stygian witches in Conan, or the Witches Free, which is based on the Witches of Fate of ancient Greece, in Shakespeare's what's it again? Macbeth of Shakespeare. So you can take different things and expand on them and have a general audience acceptance. What you can't or shouldn't do is redefine, or retroactively, or retroactively alter continuity. And hopefully I've given you, a rather big insight onto what basically a lot of people say when you write what you know. It's go beyond the research, have logic, you can invoke emotions, but don't base on politics and emotion your decisions. Because remember, if you're inserting real world politics into everything, then you're only going to appeal to that narrow group. I know from my own that I may only be appealing to a narrow group myself. I had hoped that more people would be more open-minded, mature, and adult about things. I mean, let's face it, there are lots of authors out there with huge followings that do write adult material. But I do also know from personal experience, there are a lot of good authors who don't have an audience either. So I hope you have the general sense, good sense of maturity to judge things on their merit and not on populism, because the audience is fickle as we've seen with many although popular culture, it's very fickle. It can shift very quickly. So again, write what you know. Tracing trends, as we've seen, often ends in failure for 99%. And if you think you're that 1% or are part of that 1%, that's your right. But I'm just saying, don't think your good fortune is talent. Believe me, there are a lot of good writers out there who don't have an audience simply because they're in every genre is now saturated. The people are now waiting for popular. Unfortunately, they're waiting pretty much for pop culture to die for their own chance of popularity, because the audience won't give up or won't expand beyond a handful of likes. And but when it comes to, and of course you've got to use when it comes to the customer is always right when it comes to matters of what they like. And if they only like a few things, so be it. You have to accept the facts as they are and just write what you know. And again, if you want to break into or trace trends, you have to research those trends and write what they know and hope that that catches on. And as we've seen far too often, it doesn't work. So please support the channel today. Become a patron. Thanks to my patrons. I appreciate each and every one of you. And of course, I have a second Patreon for my RPG material. And of course, my books are in the link tree in the description below. And of course, you can also buy me a coffee or a meal today. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.